This is a special report from the Law&Crime Network and for our viewers on YouTube Live and Facebook Live, dealing with the coronavirus and the issues that have arisen legally because of it. 10,000 Americans now dead, hundreds of thousands infected, millions out of work. There are lots of issues, and nobody has to apologize for being worried and concerned about what's going to happen with your job, your home, your finances, your health, and your rights. So joining us to talk about that are two lawyers who know a lot about these issues, starting with Ira Kaufman, a real estate lawyer who's joining us from his home, and from New Jersey, Afia Jonas, who's an immigration lawyer focusing on those issues. And let me start with you, Afia. How are you doing, holding up under all this?
I mean, considering what's been happening, I am doing okay. I'm still running my practice, Eunice Law. We represent immigrant clients. Just quarantined for the past 3 weeks with my family, so I'm doing okay.
And how about for you, Ira Kaufman?
I'm doing fine. I'm just answering a lot of questions all day long, helping people. Of course, people have tons of questions on the real estate matters, from commercial to residential. So that's what it's really almost all day long and night long answering questions.
Right, and we're hoping you can answer some of our viewers' questions, starting with this one. Let me read it to you. I've been laid off, can't pay my rent. What protection do I have to prevent being evicted or forced to pay a late fee?
Well, in most situations, in many states, there are now deferments where in New York, for example, it's 3 months. You cannot be evicted for 3 months, and they can't even start eviction proceedings. California is even more, that you can't even process anything for 3 months after the shutdown order is lifted. So you have to check your state in terms of what they have, but there are protections clearly in both New York and California, and then other states throughout the country in stopping evictions, stopping landlords from making any moves against the tenant.
Well, Ira, let me ask you this. With the courts closed, what recourse do you have on behalf of your clients?
Well, I represent mostly tenants, but from a landlord perspective, I mean, the clients in terms of the landlords are not allowed to make any action. So if a landlord I see a lot of landlords threatening tenants and with saying, what are you talking about? I don't ever heard of this corona. I don't know what you're talking about. But you have rights. I mean, you definitely are protected in certain states. And even if the courts are closed, in almost all states, the landlords have to go through a judicial proceeding. If the courts are closed, there's no way they can go through this judicial proceeding to get you thrown out of your apartment.
Have you seen anybody who actually been undergoing eviction proceedings? Have landlords tried to ignore the restrictions?
Not eviction proceedings, threats to pay your rent. I mean, I'm seeing that like it's due, it's the first. We came through the first of the month in April. So you're seeing a lot of, it's the first of the month, you have to pay, you're required to pay. And certainly in a lot of leases, there are protections that tenants might have in terms of claiming it's a casualty or claiming this is interruption. There's common law doctrines about impossibility of performance on a commercial tenant when they're shut down. So from that perspective, from commercial, for residential, again, it's very difficult for landlords just to start these proceedings when the courts are not even open to evict the tenants. But they are threatening tenants, like you have to pay first of the month, those things. In California, they have actually stopped only interest and late fees. So you can't even be charged interest or any late fees on any eviction proceeding.
Afi, a question for you from one of our colleagues at Law&Crime, Brian Buckmeyer, who's a lawyer and also a Canadian citizen. Here's his question.
Brian Buckmeyer, as an immigrant who resides in New York and lives with his wife, I'm fearful because my mother, father, and elderly uncle still live in Toronto. What happens if they get sick and I'm needed to be there or I want to be there by their side? Will the United States government stop me from leaving the country and going to see my sick family? And my other fear is when I want to return back home, because the United States is my home with my wife, will they stop me from doing so because I'm not a citizen?
Afia, what do you say to that? That's not an uncommon complaint.
Yeah, and as of about a week ago, the northern land border is closed to non-essential traffic. So that's on both sides, from the Canadian government and the US government. How they're defining non-essential is for tourism or pleasure. This individual can go to the border and request essential travel into Canada. And it's really up to the discretion of this Customs and Border Protection officer if they're going to allow them in or not. Now, whether he's able to come back to the United States is going to be, again, an issue. As long as he hasn't visited, Iran, China, or the other 26 European countries that have been banned, he should be able to come back into the United States as a lawful permanent resident without any issue.
And Afia, there are lots of questions for people who are undocumented, who President Trump calls illegal. He was asked about their rights at a recent news conference about the rights for those who are undocumented.
Yeah, and Brian,
do pay taxes through their ID numbers, yet they will not receive any money in their stimulus package, and no undocumented immigrant will receive any aid from the government during this crisis. How do you suppose they survive during the COVID-19?
Well, you're saying undocumented, meaning they came in illegally. And a lot of people would say we have a lot of citizens right now that won't be working. So what are you going to do? It's a tough thing. It's a very sad question, I must be honest with you. But they came in illegally. And we have a lot of people that are citizens of our country that won't be able to have jobs. Now, I do think once we get rid of the virus, I think we're going to have a boom economy. I think it's going to go up rather quickly.
Afi, it seems to me almost no sympathy or empathy for the plight of those who are here who are undocumented. What do you say about their rights, given what President Trump has been saying?
well, first, a fact check. Those who are undocumented are not always entering illegally. Some of them did enter lawfully and may have overstayed. But it's sad that the president of our country doesn't seem to have anything in place, any policy, or even considering policy to help these individuals. And I think now is the time where we're really going to see how much they contribute to our society, how much they contribute to our economy. And now they're just kind of left to the wayside. I do want to say, though, that they can avail of public benefits as it relates to the treatment and preventative care of COVID-19. And USCIS has assured that those benefits will not be considered against them if they apply for an immigration benefit later.
Some countries have given all people who are in their country temporary citizenships so they can have health benefits. Are you concerned that undocumented individuals can't get health benefits? That's just going to spread the virus, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the irony. It's like we're more focused on, keeping these people out and keeping them in the shadows, and we're not thinking about the greater health risk that it poses. Even though these benefits are available to them, as I said, a lot of them are really scared to come forward. They don't know if they can go to a hospital. They don't know if they have to fill out forms. A lot of them don't have social security numbers, and they don't want to fill out these forms. And so instead, they may be posing a health risk. And so this is just another situation where it's becoming more and more apparent that we can't keep ignoring them, and we need to create a solution.
And a question from one of our viewers, Afia, is it true the second string of COVID-19 will appear after the round and will be harder to fight? And this applies particularly to people who don't have access to health care.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that the president also implemented a broadened public charge rule earlier this year. And so undocumented immigrants who avail of public health benefits, it can be held against them. And so that's, again, a problem moving forward. But I do want to reiterate that as it relates to COVID-19 benefits for treatment and preventative care, it won't be held against them. But again, Brian, we're seeing how this is becoming an exacerbated problem. It's showing and revealing the issues in our healthcare system and in our immigration system.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about your rights and your questions in the light of the coronavirus, a special report from Law&Crime. With us today is Ira Kaufman, a real estate lawyer, and Afia Jonas, an immigration lawyer. Ira, let me ask you this. At this point, the prospect of being thrown out of your business because you don't pay rent also must be a huge issue, not just your home.
Yes, I mean, it clearly is a serious issue. I mean, businesses that are been shut down by orders have no money coming in, and they have no way to pay their rent. I mean, it's certainly that a lot of them have savings, but they're trying. Most businesses that I work with are trying to pay their employees, trying to pay their bills. And some are operating just doing, like, say, you're a restaurant, you're doing takeout and delivery, but those at much smaller numbers in terms of sales. So it's very difficult for these commercial tenants to pay their rent.
As you know, there have been actual huge protests in some cities about this. One recently took place in Chicago. It was covered by WGN. Take a look at this and tell me what you think, Ira.
No more evictions! No more evictions!
Protesters held signs
Rent strike works!
saying rent strike, no poor road, and even before our rent was due, our shelter in place is being threatened.
I told them, hey guys, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent.
Some residents say they're running out of options, having lost their jobs, savings, and ability to even buy food. Many say they're struggling to claim unemployment benefits as the state system is overwhelmed.
People already have difficulties with having lost their jobs, and it's a crisis for absolutely everyone.
So, Ira Kaufman, you can see lots of stress for people all over the country about what's going to happen with so many uncertainties, particularly about where you live.
Well, clearly, if you're in an area that doesn't have the protections, like I mentioned in New York and California, that's a problem, and that's something the political leaders have to address. A lot of these people, they want to go to their jobs. They're just not allowed to go to their jobs because the jobs have been shut down. So the government has made that decision. If you're going to shut people's jobs down, then you really have to understand that how are they going to pay their rent and do other things, and you don't want people evicted. As I said, I think that the New York and California have proposed to defer any evictions is a smart thing. The question is, even New York, they're just deferring the rent for 3 months. If people have laid off, how in 3 months are they going to be able to make 3 months of rent back when they're lucky to make maybe June rent? They're not going to be able to pay April and May also.
And let me follow that up in terms of residential rent. How do you make good on the back rent? Can you then be evicted?
Right. Well, under California and New York, that's the case. They're giving you more time in California than New York, but it is definitely a problem. And that's the comment is, a lot of landlords are saying, "Oh, I'll defer the rent," but if it's supposed to be paid in 2 or 3 months, you're never going to be able to make that payment. I mean, there's certain situations from a commercial perspective where we're pushing rent on to the end of the lease. We're actually adding 2 months to a lease and maybe paying for operating expenses during the 2 months that you're closed, or 1 month or two, how long that'll be. But certainly, I don't see, if you're having trouble paying rent in April, you're not going to be able to pay 4 months of rent in June. I think that's unrealistic to think people would be able to make those payments.
Ira, here's a question from someone. I had a deal to sell my apartment. A contract was signed, but now because of the virus, the buyers say they want out of the deal. Should I let them out? Can I let them out? How do I force them to pay?
It depends upon the state that you're in. I mean, everybody's different. Usually, you can't force. Most contracts don't let you actually force someone to buy the apartment. But the question is, can you keep the down payment, the deposit that they put down? And if you do, the buyer is going to claim impossibility, problems like that. So there could be issues. You'd have to really look at the contract. But the buyers would, in that situation, say, look, there's been something that came up. It's impossibility. We can't do the closing. Whereas, but the seller most states would permit the seller to keep the down payment.
Are people still going ahead with real estate deals, buying, selling, renting, leasing?
It's interesting. In New York, they just said that real estate brokerage is essential business. So you're seeing that. And I'm in Florida right now, and I know a lot of people are looking to, I see a lot of transactions here in Florida. So it's still coming on in terms of people are buying, people are looking for like houses now. I mean, there's going to be a change in terms of what kind of people, where people want to live. But yes, there are still transactions going on.
Afia, let me ask you this question, a little bit outside of your area of expertise, but is there a promise of canceling the coronavirus bill after the epidemic passes?
I mean, all bills can be changed or amended by a new bill, so it depends on what the legislature wants to do. We're all definitely bracing ourselves for what's to come after this and what our elected congresspersons are willing to do. We are pushing Congress right now as it relates to immigration to urge ICE and detention facilities around the country to release detained immigrants who don't have a flight risk due to the increased exposure and risk in detention centers. So we can always see legislature enact new legislation after all of this goes away. I'm assuming there will be some type of stimulus bill again after all of this. We have to see what happens.
Afia, one federal judge ordered ICE to, as best possible, release children from detention. Is that happening? And what are the conditions inside these detention camps?
I mean, the detention facilities are a hotbed for virus and contagious viruses to go from inmate to inmate. And we're seeing increasingly ICE kind of responding to the ACLU and to other immigration lawyer associations, pushing for them to release detainees. Unfortunately, the conditions are horrible. Any photos you see, that were somehow taken by someone who was inside the facility can see that the conditions are the opposite of quarantine. I mean, you have multiple children, families in very small quarters. And so it's very dangerous. And we're seeing, thankfully, more and more inmates, more detainees being released.
Afia, another question here. I'm in the middle of getting my citizenship, and now it's been stalled. What's going to happen? Does this affect people who have a process underway?
Absolutely. I have many clients who had interviews scheduled over the past 3 weeks that have been canceled or rescheduled. Unfortunately, if you had an interview up until now, USCIS is saying April 30th, you're going to get a reschedule notice. So you'll first get a notice saying that your interview is going to be rescheduled, and then you have to wait until you get the new notice saying what the date is for your new interview. For clients that I have had reschedule notices, I have not gotten the new dates yet. It's definitely going to delay the process significantly. As long as this is going on, USCIS is not going to be holding interviews.
All right, Ira Kaufman, here's a question from one of our viewers who's looking on the bright side of things. Here's his question. Is it a good time to buy real estate, and how long will these interest rates last?
Is it a good time to buy real? Well, people all, I mean, it definitely in certain areas of the country. I mean, I work in New York and I have in Florida right now, and you see a lot of interest that people, if they're going to be at quarantine, they'd rather have a house. They'd rather have a larger house. I mean, it's something very important. I mean, things that like a home gym in a house used to be a luxury. Now it's almost a necessity. A home office is now a necessity, not a luxury. So you're seeing some changes. The apartments in New York have gone up in price year after year after year. And they're, one of the most expensive places in the United States, and San Francisco also. I don't know if people want to live in a 500 square foot apartment when they have a chance to have a larger house that gives them more space if this quarantine, if there's another quarantine in the future.
Let me ask you just a market question. What's going to happen to the real estate market? Are prices completely collapsing?
Well, look, it's so quick right now. I think in terms of, as I said, in certain areas, I think they will. I have to think they're going to go down in New York a lot. And they had been going down even before the coronavirus. But in states like Florida, I think states like Texas, I think I said people who are looking for homes, you'll see that. And I think that people will want to they'd rather have their own house with their pool. So if this ever happens again, they have more space. I think people paid a lot of money for these luxury apartments in New York that are wishing they were in a larger house right now.
Here's another question, right, relates to what's going on. With the onslaught of so many people working from home, what's going to happen to the business of renting office space?
Well, clearly that's a point. And I wanted to get back to something we talked about earlier for a second, is that on the CARES Act, you are allowed to, for businesses, they are able to ask the government in terms of those grants, loans that would be forgiven. But a lot of people could be considered independent contractors who work out of their house normally. And you could also go to the bank and talk to your banker and try to apply for those CARES loans. But commercial rents, yeah, there's a problem. I mean, the longer this goes on, people are working from their homes. Tenants need so much office space if people are getting more comfortable. Now, I do think that there's a need to have a base. I mean, people will want to actually go to the office and go into work in a space. But now instead of taking 20,000 square feet, maybe a tenant might take 10,000 square feet. So that's going to be a difference in terms of, do they need that much space anyway, as people are more comfortable now using Zoom, doing those meetings online that really never worked at home before.
All right, just a couple minutes left. Afia, what's going to happen once the pandemic passes and the courts reopen? What about the backlog?
Yeah, unfortunately, most immigration courts are closed. And again, unfortunately, some of them are still open and not providing access to legal counsel, which is an ongoing issue. I mean, the backlog in immigration courts is astronomical. And to even think that it's going to become worse, I can't even wrap my head around. Unfortunately, we're getting hearings 2 to 3 years out. And so I can't imagine having hearings even double that, perhaps. Hearings are getting continued, they're getting rescheduled because lawyers are not able to go into the hearings with their clients due to the risk of exposure and being contagious. And so they're having to request reschedule and continuance. And so what's happening is, on the back end, hopefully when all of this is over, there's going to be an even greater backlog that hopefully Congress will address.
And Ira, for you, in 15 seconds, what's going to happen in real estate court, real estate law?
Well, in terms of courts, there's already, as I say, there's a backlog right now in terms of trying. There's not as many judges, and it's difficult. And certainly, if people aren't paying their rent and landlords start running to courts, it's just going to take forever. So that the point is, if you're having trouble paying rent, use your time, save your, I wouldn't say people not to do everything. You can pay your rent, but it's not going to be like something's going to happen tomorrow that you're going to get evicted from your apartment, or that you're going to have to pay money, because for them to go procedures will take a very long time.
All right. Okay. Ira Kaufman, thank you so much for joining us. Afia Yunus, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again here on Wednesday, a special report from the Law and Crime Network. Brian Ross, have a good afternoon and stay safe.